Before we toast, I have a question for my daughter Patricia. My grandfather's voice cut through the cheerful noise of Christmas dinner like a blade through wrapping paper. 26 people sat around the extended dining table in my parents' elegantly decorated dining room, wine glasses raised toward the chandelier, smiles frozen in place, waiting for what everyone assumed would be another one of Grandpa's sentimental holiday speeches about family and gratitude and the importance of being together during the holiday season. But something in his tone was different this year. Something cold and deliberate and measured that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up in a way I could not quite explain. My mother, Patricia, sat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table from my grandfather, her own glass of Chardonnay suspended halfway to her lips. She was 61 years old, still beautiful in that carefully maintained way of women who have spent their entire lives in comfortable circumstances, with access to the best skincare and personal trainers and whatever else money could buy. And she was looking at her father with an expression I had never once seen on her face in 36 years of being her son. Fear. Pure, undisguised, visceral fear. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor that she was clearly trying and failing to suppress. What question could possibly be so important that it cannot wait until after we have finished dinner? My grandfather, Edward Fairbanks, was 89 years old. He had survived the Korean War, built a successful manufacturing company from nothing but determination and hard work, buried a wife he had loved for 53 years, and a son who had died far too young. He had watched 3 generations of his family grow up under his watchful eye, had presided over countless holiday dinners exactly like this one, had been the patriarch of the Fairbanks family for longer than most of us had been alive. He was frail now, confined to a wheelchair most days, his once powerful frame diminished by age and the cancer that was slowly killing him. But his mind remained as sharp as it had ever been, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing. Those eyes were fixed on my mother now with an intensity that made everyone sitting around the table shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. "The question is quite simple, Patricia," he said, his voice steady and controlled despite his age and illness. "I want to know who Elliot's real father is, because I have become quite certain that it is not Richard." The silence that followed was absolute, complete, suffocating. 26 people sat frozen in place, wine glasses suspended in midair, forks paused halfway to open mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence as the weight of my grandfather's words settled over the room like a funeral shroud. I felt the blood drain from my face as every eye in the room turned to look at me. I was sitting in my usual spot, 3 seats down from my father on the left side of the table, wearing the navy sweater my mother had given me last Christmas because she said it brought out my eyes. I was 36 years old, a software engineer with a good job and a nice apartment in Seattle, home for the holidays like a dutiful son. And I had no idea what my grandfather was talking about. Or did I? My father, Richard Fairbanks, was sitting directly to my left. I heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the sudden tension radiating from his body, saw his knuckles go white as his grip tightened on the silver butter knife he had been holding. He did not look at me. He seemed incapable of looking at anything except the plate of untouched food in front of him, as if making eye contact with anyone in the room would somehow make this moment more real. "Dad, what on earth are you talking about?" my mother demanded, her voice rising with something that sounded very much like hysteria. "Richard is Elliot's father. He has always been Elliot's father. What kind of ridiculous, hurtful question is that to ask at Christmas dinner in front of the entire family?" My grandfather reached into the pocket of his gray wool cardigan with a hand that trembled slightly from age and withdrew a yellow envelope. It was creased and worn, as if it had been handled many times over, folded and unfolded and studied in private moments when no one else was watching. "This is a DNA test," he said calmly, holding the envelope up so everyone at the table could see it clearly. "I had it performed 6 months ago, using samples I collected myself during a family gathering. Hair from Elliot's brush that he left in the bathroom. A coffee cup that Richard used and left at my house after Sunday brunch. I sent them to 3 separate laboratories, Patricia. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything to anyone." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the table like a physical presence that pressed down on all of us. Richard is not Elliot's biological father. The tests are conclusive, unanimous, and irrefutable, which means that someone sitting at this table has been lying to this family for 36 years. And I believe I have a right to know the truth before I die. I did not move. I did not breathe. I sat there in my chair at my parents' Christmas dinner table, surrounded by aunts and uncles and cousins and the two people I had always believed were my parents, and I felt my entire understanding of who I was, of where I came from, of my place in this family and this world, crumbling like a sandcastle in a rising tide. 36 years. My entire life was built on a lie. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, every single day of my childhood, if I had ever been willing to open my eyes and actually look at them. My name is Elliot Fairbanks. Or at least, that is the name I have used for 36 years, the name on my birth certificate and my driver's license and my college diploma. I am a software engineer at a technology company in Seattle, successful enough by conventional measures to have a nice apartment downtown and a decent car and the kind of career that looks impressive on paper and at family gatherings. I grew up in a wealthy suburb of Boston, attended the same prestigious private schools that generations of Fairbanks children had attended before me, went to a well-regarded university, and built a career that my family acknowledged with polite indifference whenever the subject happened to come up. I was always the outsider. Even as a small child, too young to understand why, I sensed that something was fundamentally different about my place in the family, though I could never quite articulate what it was or put my finger on the source of my unease. There was a distance between me and the rest of them, an invisible barrier that I could feel but not see, a sense that I was somehow standing on the outside of a circle looking in. My sister, Caroline, who was 3 years younger than me, was clearly and unambiguously my father's favorite. He lit up like a Christmas tree whenever she entered a room, his face transforming from its usual stern composure into something warmer and more human. He praised her achievements effusively, no matter how minor they might be. He attended every dance recital and school play and soccer game, sitting in the front row with his camera, capturing every moment of her performances. He took her on special father-daughter trips, just the two of them, to New York for Broadway shows and to Paris for her 16th birthday. He taught her to drive in his prized vintage Porsche, something he never would have trusted me with. He walked her down the aisle at her wedding 3 years ago with tears of joy streaming down his distinguished face. With me, everything was different. My father was not overtly cruel or abusive. He never hit me, never screamed at me, never did anything that would have warranted intervention from teachers or counselors or concerned relatives. He provided for me materially, ensured I had everything I needed in terms of food and shelter and education, fulfilled the basic minimum obligations of parenthood. But there was always a wall between us, a pane of glass that I could never quite break through no matter how hard I tried. He looked at Caroline like she was the sun and the moon and all the stars in the sky. He looked at me like I was a task he had reluctantly agreed to complete but did not particularly enjoy. I spent most of my childhood and adolescence trying desperately to earn his approval, his attention, his love. I got straight A's in school because I thought academic achievement would make him proud. I tried out for the same sports teams he had played on during his own youth, football and lacrosse and baseball, even though I had no natural athletic ability and spent most of my time on the bench. I chose my college major based on what I thought he would respect, studying computer science because he had always said that technology was the future and that smart young men should position themselves accordingly. I took a job at a prestigious company after graduation, turned down opportunities that might have been more fulfilling because they would not have impressed him as much. None of it made any difference. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. He would glance at my report card and say, "Good job," without bothering to look up from his newspaper or his phone. He would attend my games but spend the entire time checking emails or talking to other parents, never actually watching me play. He would nod politely when I told him about my promotions and accomplishments, then spend the next hour engaged in animated conversation with Caroline about her latest vacation or relationship drama or whatever else was happening in her life. I told myself for years that it was just his personality, that some fathers were not naturally demonstrative with their sons, that his love was there, somewhere beneath the surface, even if he could not find the words or the gestures to express it. I made excuses for his behavior, rationalized his indifference, convinced myself that the problem was my perception rather than his parenting. But there was always a voice in the back of my mind, a quiet whisper that I could never quite silence, telling me that something was fundamentally, terribly wrong. That the distance between us was not just about personality differences or generational communication styles. That he looked at me the way he did, with that barely concealed coldness, because on some level he might not even consciously acknowledge, he knew. He knew I was not his son. The Christmas dinner where my grandfather finally exposed the truth was supposed to be a celebration. My grandfather had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months earlier, and the doctors had given him less than a year to live. This was almost certainly going to be his last Christmas. His last chance to gather the entire family together under one roof, and everyone had made the effort to be there. Aunts and uncles had flown in from across the country. Cousins had rearranged their schedules. Even my father's perpetually busy business partners had declined the invitation to their own holiday parties so they could pay their respects to the Fairbanks patriarch. My mother had outdone herself with the preparations, transforming her already elegant home into something that belonged in a magazine spread. Every surface was covered with tasteful holiday arrangements and twinkling white lights. The dining room table, extended to its maximum length with 3 additional leaves, was set with the family china that only came out for the most special occasions. The meal had been catered by the same company that had handled her charity galas and society events for years, and there was enough food to feed twice as many people as were actually present. Everything was perfect. Everything was beautiful. Everything was exactly what a Fairbanks Christmas was supposed to be. And then my grandfather opened his mouth and detonated a bomb that would destroy it all. "This is absolutely absurd," my father said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. He was still gripping his butter knife, his knuckles white with the pressure, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple in a way that suggested dangerously elevated blood pressure. "I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing, Edward, but I will not sit here at my own dinner table and listen to these outrageous accusations. Elliot is my son. He has always been my son. He has my name, he grew up in my house, and I do not care what some laboratory claims to have found. There must be some kind of mistake or contamination or laboratory error." My grandfather shook his head slowly, almost sadly, like a teacher disappointed in a student who refuses to learn an obvious lesson. "There is no mistake, Richard. I had the test performed by 3 separate laboratories, each working independently without knowledge of the others. I used different samples each time, collected on different occasions. The results were identical in every case. You and Elliot do not share enough genetic markers to be biologically related as father and son. The probability of error is less than 1 in 10 billion. This is not a mistake. This is the truth. Then someone tampered with the samples," my father insisted, his voice rising. "Or the laboratories made errors. Or you are deliberately trying to destroy this family for some reason I cannot begin to fathom. Maybe the cancer has affected your mind. Maybe you are not thinking clearly. But I will not accept this. I will not. Richard." My grandfather's voice was gentle now, almost pitying, the voice of a man who has lived long enough to see through all the lies we tell ourselves and others. "I have known the truth for decades. I have simply chosen not to speak it until now, until I have so little time left that I no longer care about the consequences of honesty. Your son, your real biological son, the child who actually shares your DNA, has been dead for 35 years. What you have been raising all this time, what you have been treating with such barely concealed contempt for 3.5 decades, is not your son at all. He is your nephew." The word hung in the air like a physical object, like something you could reach out and touch if you were brave enough. "Nephew." I saw my mother's wine glass slip from her suddenly nerveless fingers and shatter on the hardwood floor, the expensive Chardonnay spreading like blood across the polished surface. I saw my sister's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with a shock that might have been genuine or might have been theatrical performance for the benefit of the assembled relatives. I saw aunts and uncles exchanging looks of horror and confusion, cousins frozen in uncomfortable silence, everyone waiting to see what would happen next in this drama that had suddenly erupted in the middle of their holiday meal. And I saw my father turn to look at me, really look at me, for what felt like the first time in my entire life. There was no love in that gaze. No residual affection, no complicated feelings that might still contain some kernel of paternal warmth. Just a cold assessment, a reevaluation, as if he were seeing me clearly for the first time and did not like what he found. "Who?" he asked, turning back to my grandfather. His voice was barely a whisper now, stripped of all its earlier defensive bravado. "If I am not his father, if he is my nephew, then who is his actual father? Who did Patricia?" He could not finish the sentence, could not bring himself to speak the words that would make his wife's betrayal explicit and undeniable. My grandfather's pale blue eyes moved from my father to my mother, who was sitting absolutely still at her end of the table, tears streaming silently down her carefully made-up face, ruining the makeup she had spent an hour applying that morning. "I think Patricia should answer that question herself," he said quietly. "She is the only one who knows the complete truth of what happened. She is the only one who can explain." Every head in the room turned toward my mother. She sat there in her designer dress and her diamond earrings and her perfectly styled hair, surrounded by the evidence of the perfect life she had constructed so carefully over so many decades, and she looked like a woman watching her entire world burn down around her with no way to stop the flames. "It was Thomas," she whispered, so softly that I almost did not hear her over the pounding of my own heart. "Elliot's father was Thomas. Your brother Thomas." Thomas. My father had a brother named Thomas. I knew almost nothing about him beyond the bare facts, just that he had existed and that he had died young, before I was born, in some kind of accident that the family rarely discussed. There was a single photograph of him in my grandmother's old album, a young man with dark hair and a rakish smile, frozen forever in his mid-20s. A young man who, now that I forced myself to actually look at the memory of that photograph, looked remarkably like me. "Thomas?" my father repeated, and the name emerged from his mouth like poison, like something rotten that had to be expelled. "My brother Thomas. My own brother. You slept with my brother." My mother did not deny it. She did not try to explain or justify or minimize. She did not offer excuses or context or the kind of rationalizations that people usually reach for when their darkest secrets are exposed. She just sat there, weeping silently, as 36 years of carefully constructed lies collapsed around her like a house built on sand. "It was one time," she finally said, her voice breaking apart on every word. "One stupid, terrible, unforgivable mistake. We were engaged, Richard, you and I. The wedding was 3 months away. But you were on that business trip to Japan, gone for 3 weeks, and Thomas came over to help me with something at the house. We had too much wine. One thing led to another. It just happened. I never planned it. I never wanted it. And I have regretted it every single day since." "Stop!" My father held up his hand, his face contorted with disgust that seemed to encompass not just my mother but me as well, and everyone else in the room who had witnessed his humiliation. "I do not want to hear the details. I do not want to know how my fiancé ended up in bed with my own brother. Some things cannot be unheard. I never meant for it to happen," my mother continued, as if the words were being pulled out of her against her will. "And when I found out I was pregnant, I was absolutely terrified. I did not know what to do. I did not know whose baby it was, not for certain, not at first. Thomas wanted me to tell you the truth. He said you deserved to know, that we both owed you that much. But I could not. I loved you, Richard. I wanted to marry you, to have a life with you, to be part of this family. So I convinced Thomas to keep the secret. I told him it would destroy everything if you ever found out. I told him the baby was probably yours anyway, that the timing worked out, that there was no reason to blow up everyone's lives over something that might not even be true. So you passed his child off as mine." My father's voice was cold, hollow, empty of everything except a bone-deep weariness and disgust. "For 36 years, you let me believe that Elliot was my son. You let me raise him, provide for him, give him my name and my place in this family and my inheritance. And the whole time, every single day for 3.5 decades, he was Thomas's bastard." I flinched at the word. Bastard. Is that what I was now? Not Richard's son. Not a real Fairbanks. Just a bastard born from a secret affair between my mother and my father's dead brother? Richard, please, my mother begged, reaching toward him across the expanse of the table. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I have done a terrible thing, and I have spent 36 years living with the guilt of it. But Elliot is innocent in all of this. He did not know. He has never known. He is still the same person he has always been. He is still the boy you raised, the man you watched grow up. Biology does not change that. Does it not? My father turned to look at me again, and I saw something fundamental change in his eyes. Whatever complicated feelings he had harbored toward me over the years, whatever sense of paternal obligation or familial duty had motivated him to provide and protect, it was gone now, replaced by nothing but cold, undisguised contempt. He has my brother's blood running through his veins. My brother who betrayed me. My brother who slept with my fiancée 3 months before our wedding and fathered a child that I was tricked into raising as my own. Every single time I looked at Elliot over the past 36 years and felt that something was wrong, that something did not quite fit, that he was somehow different from me and Caroline, I was right. My instincts knew the truth even when my conscious mind refused to accept it. That is enough, Richard. My grandfather's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack, sharp and commanding despite his age and illness. You have every right to be angry at Patricia. What she did was wrong, a betrayal of the worst kind, and she has lived with that guilt for 36 years. But you will not take your anger out on Elliot. He is an innocent party in all of this. More innocent than any of you in this room seem to realize. What is that supposed to mean? My father demanded, turning his anger toward my grandfather now. My grandfather looked at me then, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. Not the polite interest of a grandfather fulfilling his familial obligations. Not the distant assessment of a patriarch evaluating the next generation. Something deeper, something warmer. Pride. Genuine, unmistakable pride. It means that I have watched Elliot grow up feeling unloved and unwanted in this family. My grandfather said, his voice steady and clear. I have watched him try desperately, for his entire childhood and beyond, to earn your approval, Richard. To make you see him. To make you love him. Never understanding why he could never quite succeed, no matter what he achieved or how hard he tried. I have watched him become a good man, a decent man, a man of integrity and kindness, despite the coldness he experienced in this house, despite the favoritism you showed to Caroline, despite the constant unspoken message that he was somehow not enough, that he was somehow lacking, that he would never measure up no matter what he did. He paused, and I saw tears glistening in his pale blue eyes. Thomas was my favorite son, he continued, his voice softer now, laden with grief that had never fully healed. He was kind and generous and so full of life. When he died in that accident, I thought I would never recover from the loss. I thought a part of me had died with him. But then I watched Elliot grow up, and I saw Thomas living on in him. The same kindness, the same quiet strength, the same determination to do right by others even when no one is watching. The same gentle spirit that made Thomas the best of my children. My grandfather raised his wine glass toward me, a gesture of toast that somehow felt more significant than any honor I had ever received. Elliot is Thomas's son, and that means he is the best of all of us. The very best of this family. I felt tears streaming down my own face, hot and unexpected and completely beyond my ability to control. In 36 years of life, I could not remember a single member of my family ever expressing pride in me with such conviction, such certainty, such love. My grandfather, in the final months of his life, had given me something I had not even known I was missing. A father who was proud of me, even if it was not the father I had always believed was mine. There is more, my grandfather continued, setting down his glass and fixing his gaze on my father. I have recently updated my will. Given everything that has now come to light, I no longer feel bound by the distribution I had originally planned. My father's head snapped up immediately. Despite everything that had just been revealed, despite the fundamental destruction of his understanding of his family and his marriage, His attention was instantly captured by the mention of inheritance. Some things, apparently, were more important than existential crises. "The bulk of my estate," my grandfather announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "including the manufacturing company, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, and the various other assets I have accumulated over my lifetime, will now go to Elliot. As Thomas's only child, as my grandson by blood, he is the rightful heir to what would have been his father's share of my estate. And given the way that Richard and Patricia have treated him for the past 36 years, given the coldness and the neglect and the subtle cruelty that I have witnessed with my own eyes, I believe some compensation is more than justified." The explosion that followed was immediate, volcanic, and exactly what I should have expected. My father was on his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor, shouting about manipulation and undue influence and how he would contest every word of that will in court. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, torn between guilt over her secret and horror at the financial implications of its revelation. Caroline was crying too, her face contorted with fury, whether from shock at learning that her brother was actually her cousin or from concern about her own diminished inheritance. I could not tell. Aunts and uncles began choosing sides immediately, some rushing to comfort my father, others suggesting in more measured tones that my grandfather had every legal right to dispose of his estate however he saw fit. Cousins made awkward excuses and fled the dining room, suddenly discovering urgent needs to check on children or make phone calls or get some fresh air. The carefully orchestrated Christmas dinner, the picture-perfect Fairbanks holiday celebration, had devolved into complete and utter chaos, and I sat there in the middle of all of it, utterly still, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. I was not Richard Fairbanks's son. I never had been. The man I had spent my entire life trying to please, whose approval I had so desperately sought, whose coldness I had internalized as evidence of my own inadequacy, was not my father at all. My real father was Thomas Fairbanks, a man who had died 3 months before I was born, whose face I had only seen in a single faded photograph in a dusty album. A man who, according to my grandfather, had been kind and generous and full of life. A man whose son I was only now learning I had always been. Without saying a word to anyone, I stood up from the table and walked out of the dining room. The shouting continued behind me as I passed through the elegantly decorated living room, past the towering Christmas tree with its perfectly coordinated ornaments, out the front door into the cold December night. The air was sharp and clean, biting at my exposed face and hands, a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal and recrimination inside. I walked down the front steps of my parents' house, the house I had grown up in, the house that suddenly felt like it belonged to strangers, and I kept walking, not knowing or caring where I was going, just needing to move, to breathe, to create physical distance between myself and everything I had just learned. I had been walking for about 20 minutes, my feet carrying me automatically through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, when I heard the sound of wheels on pavement behind me. I turned to see my grandfather's caretaker, a kind woman named Maria who had been helping him since his diagnosis, pushing his wheelchair carefully down the snow-dusted sidewalk. Despite the cold, my grandfather was bundled in a heavy coat and thick blankets, his breath fogging in the winter air. "Grandpa, you should not be out here," I said, hurrying back toward him. "It is freezing. You are going to get pneumonia. Please, let Maria take you back inside." "I am dying of cancer anyway," my grandfather said with a wry, sad smile. "A little cold is not going to make much difference at this point. The doctors have already given me less than 6 months. What is a chill going to do? Kill me faster. I wanted to talk to you, Elliot, alone, without all the shouting and the crying and the family drama." I nodded at Maria, who stepped back a few paces to give us some privacy, though she stayed close enough to intervene if my grandfather showed any signs of distress. "I am sorry for how I chose to reveal the truth," my grandfather said, his breath misting in the cold air. "I know it was not gentle or kind. I know I could have found a better way, a private moment, something that would have given you time to process before everyone else found out. But I have been carrying this secret for so long, watching what it has done to you and to this family, and I could not bear to die without finally speaking the truth." "You knew," I said, It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a reality I was still trying to absorb. You knew all along that I was not Richard's son. All those years, all those family gatherings, all those times you watched how he treated me. You knew why. I suspected from the very beginning, my grandfather admitted. Thomas told me about the affair before he died. He came to me about a month before the accident, and he confessed everything. He was tormented by guilt, by what he had done to his brother, by the secret he was being forced to keep. He wanted to tell Richard the truth. He wanted to take responsibility for his actions, to claim you as his child if you turned out to be his. He thought it was the right thing to do, the honorable thing, no matter how much pain it might cause. Why did he not? Because Patricia begged him not to. She was pregnant and terrified and completely convinced that the truth would destroy everything she had worked to build. She told Thomas that if he loved her at all, if he had any respect for the child she was carrying, he would keep quiet and let her pretend that nothing had happened. Thomas agreed against his better judgment. He agreed because he loved her, because he loved you already, even before you were born. But he made me promise something. What? He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would look after you, that I would make sure you were cared for, protected, loved. He had a premonition, I think, some sense that he might not be around to keep that promise himself. 3 months later, he was dead. How did he die? I asked. It was a question I had never thought to ask before, a piece of family history that had always been glossed over or avoided. What happened to him? My grandfather's weathered face darkened with old pain, grief that had never fully healed despite the passage of 35 years. It was a car accident. He was driving home from a business meeting, late at night, on a stretch of highway that was notorious for drunk drivers and poor visibility. A truck ran a red light at an intersection and hit him head-on. The police said he died instantly. He never suffered, at least. That is what they told us. Whether it is true or just something they say to comfort grieving families, I have never known. My grandfather reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man so close to death. He never got to see you, Elliot, never got to hold you, never got to know the remarkable person you would become. But I have watched you for 36 years. I have seen his kindness in you, his integrity, his quiet strength. And I have never once doubted that you are his son, that you are the best thing he ever gave to this world. I felt tears streaming down my face, freezing in the cold air almost as soon as they emerged. My father, my real father, had died before I was born. He had wanted to claim me, to tell the truth, to do the right thing. And he had never gotten the chance. Why did you wait so long to tell me? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Why did you let me grow up thinking Richard was my father? Knowing how he treated me, knowing why. My grandfather sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades of regret. Because I was a coward, he said simply. Because I told myself that it was better for you to have a father, even a distant and cold one, than to grow up knowing you were the product of an affair. Because I kept hoping, year after year, that Richard would eventually come to love you for who you were, regardless of your biology. That his heart would soften. That he would see what I saw when I looked at you. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. I watched Richard treat you like an obligation, like a burden, like something he had been tricked into accepting. And I said nothing. I watched you try so desperately hard to earn his love, and I stayed silent. I let Patricia's secret become a prison for all of us. And for that, for my cowardice and my silence, I am truly and deeply sorry. You are telling me now, I said, at the end. That has to count for something. I am telling you now because I am dying, and I refuse to leave this world without making things right. You deserve to know where you come from. You deserve to know that your father, your real father, was a good man who would have loved you fiercely and unconditionally if he had lived. And you deserve to have the inheritance that should have been Thomas's, the inheritance that is rightfully yours. The money does not matter to me, I said, and I meant it. I have my own career, my own savings, my own life. I do not need Richard's share of your estate. It is not Richard's share, my grandfather corrected me gently. It is Thomas's share. The share that would have gone to him if he had lived. The share that rightfully belongs to his son. To you. He squeezed my hand again, his pale blue eyes meeting mine with an intensity that seemed to reach across the generations. Take it, Elliot. Not because you need the money, but because it is your birthright. Because Thomas would have wanted you to have it. Because you are a Fairbanks, truly and completely, not through Richard but through Thomas. And it is time the rest of this family recognized that truth. I did not know what to say. Everything I had believed about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, had been shattered in the space of a single dinner. I was still the same person I had been 2 hours ago, but I was also someone completely different. A man with a dead father he had never met, a mother who had lied to him every day of his life, and a family that had never fully accepted him because they sensed on some unconscious level that he did not quite belong. What happens now? I asked, the question emerging almost involuntarily. My grandfather smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost young again. Now you get to decide who you want to be, he said. Not Richard's disappointing son. Not Patricia's shameful secret. Just Elliot, Thomas's boy. A good man who finally knows where he comes from and can choose where he wants to go. We stayed there together in the cold for a while longer, my dying grandfather and I, watching the Christmas lights twinkle on the houses around us, saying nothing because sometimes silence is more eloquent than words. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I understood why I had always felt like an outsider in my own family. It was not because there was something wrong with me. It was not because I was inadequate or unlovable or fundamentally flawed. It was because they had known, consciously or unconsciously, that I did not quite belong to them in the way that I was supposed to. But I belonged to my grandfather. I belonged to the memory of a father I had never met. I belonged to myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. In the weeks following that Christmas dinner, I took a leave of absence from my job and dedicated myself to learning everything I could about the father I had never known. My grandfather, despite his declining health, spent hours with me, sharing memories and stories and photographs that had been locked away for decades. He gave me a box of Thomas's belongings that had been stored in his attic since the accident. Letters Thomas had written from college. Journals from his travels through Europe after graduation. Photographs of him at various ages, from a gap-toothed child to a confident young man with the same dark hair and easy smile that I saw when I looked in the mirror. Through these artifacts, these fragments of a life cut short, I began to piece together an understanding of who my father had been. Thomas was the younger of Edward's 2 sons, born 3 years after Richard. Where Richard was serious and ambitious and laser-focused on success, Thomas was curious and adventurous and more interested in experiences than achievements. He had studied literature in college when his father wanted him to study business. He had spent a year backpacking through Europe when he was supposed to be establishing himself in the family company. He had dated artists and musicians and free spirits, much to his mother's dismay. Thomas was always the difficult one, my grandfather told me during one of our long conversations. Difficult not because he caused trouble, but because he refused to fit into the mold we had prepared for him. Richard was easy. Richard wanted exactly what we wanted for him. But Thomas had his own ideas about what his life should look like. Was that why Richard resented him? I asked. My grandfather considered the question carefully before answering. I think Richard was jealous of Thomas, though he would never have admitted it. Thomas was beloved. People gravitated toward him. He had a warmth, a charisma, that Richard could never quite match despite all his accomplishments. Richard worked so hard to earn love and approval, and Thomas seemed to receive it effortlessly just by being himself. That sounds familiar, I said quietly. My grandfather nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. You inherited more than Thomas's kindness and his gentle spirit. You inherited his position in the family as well. The one who does not quite fit. The one who is loved less for no reason that makes any sense. Richard treated you the way he always secretly wanted to treat Thomas. And that is my fault too. I should have recognized it. I should have stopped it. I spent a lot of time during those weeks reading Thomas's journals. His handwriting was neat and precise, unexpected from someone described as a free spirit, and his observations about the world were thoughtful and often profound. One entry, written during his travels in Italy, struck me particularly deeply. I wonder sometimes if we spend our whole lives trying to become the people our families want us to be, when we should be spending that time figuring out who we actually are. Richard has never had this problem. He has always known exactly what was expected of him and has worked tirelessly to meet those expectations. I envy his certainty, even as I pity his lack of imagination. He will inherit the company and the money and the family name, and he will consider himself successful. But will he ever be happy? Will he ever feel truly alive? I am not sure Richard even knows what those words mean. Reading those words, written by my father 37 years ago, I felt a strange sense of recognition. Thomas had understood something fundamental about his brother, something that explained so much about how I had been treated throughout my childhood. Richard had never been happy. Despite all his success, all his wealth, all the approval he had earned from his parents, he had never felt truly satisfied. And somewhere deep inside, he had always known that Thomas possessed something he lacked. Some capacity for joy, for connection, for authentic living that Richard could never quite grasp. When Thomas died, Richard lost the brother he had envied. When he discovered that I was Thomas's son, not his own, he finally had an explanation for why he had never been able to love me. I was not a failed version of himself. I was a living reminder of everything he had never been able to be. It did not excuse how he had treated me. Nothing could excuse that. But understanding it helped me let go of the need for his approval that had haunted me for so long. My mother tried to reach out to me several times during this period. She called and left tearful voicemails. She sent long letters trying to explain, to justify, to apologize. She showed up at my grandfather's house once, unannounced, begging me to let her explain everything. I was not ready to hear it. I was not sure I would ever be ready. Patricia had made a choice 36 years ago, and she had made that same choice every day since. Every time she looked at me and said nothing. Every time she watched Richard treat me with coldness and indifference. Every time she allowed me to believe that there was something wrong with me, some fundamental inadequacy that explained why I could never earn my father's love. She could have told me the truth at any point. She could have spared me decades of confusion and self-doubt. Instead, she had protected her secret, her comfortable life, her carefully constructed facade of a perfect family. I understood that she had been young and frightened when she made the original choice. But the choice to keep lying year after year, decade after decade, while watching what that lie did to me, that was harder to forgive. My grandfather passed away in February, just as the first hints of spring were beginning to emerge from the long New England winter. His funeral was a tense, divided affair, with Richard and Patricia on one side of the church and me on the other, the extended family scattered between us according to whose side they had chosen in the weeks since Christmas. I gave the eulogy. It was the last thing my grandfather had asked of me, and I was honored to fulfill his wish. I spoke about his strength and his integrity, about his love for his family despite its many flaws, about the courage he had shown at the end of his life by finally speaking the truth. I did not mention the Christmas dinner revelation directly. I did not need to. Everyone in the church knew what had happened. Everyone understood the significance of me standing at the podium, speaking as the primary heir, while Richard sat in the pews with a face like thunder. After the service, Richard approached me for the first time since that night. His face was composed, controlled, the face of a businessman about to negotiate a difficult deal. "This does not have to be adversarial," he said. "We can come to an arrangement. Split the estate fairly. Avoid the lawyers and the courts and the ugliness that would come with a legal battle." "A fair split," I repeated. "What would that look like, in your mind?" 60-40. My favor. I am the legitimate heir. I worked for that company for 30 years. Whatever my father's feelings about your parentage, I have earned my share. I looked at the man who had raised me, who had provided for me, who had given me his name and his house and his complete emotional indifference for 36 years. I looked at the man who even now, even after everything, could not bring himself to acknowledge me as anything other than an obstacle to what he believed he deserved. "No," I said simply. "No? Elliot, be reasonable. If this goes to court, it will be ugly. Your mother will have to testify about her affair. Every family secret will be dragged into the light. Is that really what you want?" "What I want," I said slowly, "is to honor my grandfather's wishes. He knew exactly what he was doing when he changed his will. He wanted me to have what would have been my father's share. Not because I earned it, not because I deserved it, but because it was right. This is not about what is right. This is about you trying to punish me." "No, Richard. If I wanted to punish you, I would have done it years ago. This is about finally being seen for who I am. Thomas's son. Edward's grandson. A Fairbanks by blood as much as you are, maybe more. For 36 years, I tried to earn your love, your approval, some sign that I mattered to you. I never got it. I never understood why. Now I know. And now I do not need anything from you anymore." I walked away and did not look back. The will was executed exactly as my grandfather had specified. The bulk of the estate, worth approximately $47 million, went to me as Thomas's son and heir. Richard contested it, of course. His lawyers argued undue influence, diminished mental capacity, fraudulent inducement. They claimed that my grandfather had been manipulated, that he was not of sound mind when he changed his will, that the entire Christmas dinner revelation had been staged to disinherit the rightful heirs. The legal battle lasted almost 2 years. I had to sit through depositions where Richard's lawyers tried to paint me as a con artist. I had to listen to my mother testify in excruciating detail about her affair with Thomas. I had to endure the humiliation of having my entire life examined and picked apart by attorneys looking for any advantage. In the end, I won. The DNA evidence was irrefutable, and my grandfather's mental competence at the time of the will's revision was thoroughly documented by his doctors. The judge ruled that Edward Fairbanks had been fully within his rights to dispose of his estate as he saw fit. I used the money to establish a foundation in Thomas's name. The Thomas Fairbanks Foundation supports children who have grown up feeling like outsiders in their own families, who have experienced neglect or emotional coldness from the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally, who need someone to tell them that they matter and that there is nothing wrong with them. We fund scholarships for first-generation college students. We provide mental health services for young adults struggling with family trauma. We support mentoring programs that connect kids who feel lost and unwanted with adults who can show them that their circumstances do not define their worth. It feels like something my father would have wanted. The kind man with the rakish smile, who wrote in his journal about authenticity and connection, who died before he could hold his son, but who would have loved me fiercely if he had lived. I cannot bring Thomas back. I cannot reclaim the 36 years we should have had together, the birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings that were stolen from us by a car accident and a secret. But I can honor his memory by helping others who feel as lost and unwanted as I once did. Every year on his birthday, I visit his grave. I bring flowers and I tell him about my life, about his grandchildren, about the foundation that bears his name. I tell him about the people we have helped, the lives we have changed, the good that has come from the money that should have been his. I like to think he can hear me. I like to think he knows. I am 42 now, 6 years removed from that Christmas dinner that changed everything. I have a wife named Elena and 2 children of my own. I named my son Thomas. Every time I look at him, I see echoes of that faded photograph. And I try to be the father that Thomas never got the chance to be. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.